Hello, welcome to our early birds. We're so happy to have you here. We're really happy with the response we've gotten for this webinar, so we cannot wait for the Her Plan Power Lunch of this month. I've been anticipating this for almost a year, having planned this with Stacey, so we are so excited. As you're joining us, please go ahead and put your information in the chat. You can put your website and your name, or if you want to put your state as well, that can be really helpful since we do have so many providers of so many different kinds. And I often like to read about one thing that's really unique that you all do. So if you want to put your name, website, state, and something unique that you do, I would love to hear it. Her plan is in 25 states with an initial directory, soon to be 29 states with a directory next year. And then we also have many national partners such as Stacey and list national virtual resources in all our states as well. So we're just really happy to have y'all here. We're going to give it a few more minutes before we get started, but please keep introducing yourself in the chat and interacting with each other. And it's just wonderful to have you. All right, if you're just joining us, please introduce yourself in the chat. We love to see all of the different states, all of the different categories of care. If you want to include your state in a unique service that you do, it's wonderful because in her plan, we have pregnancy help organizations and pregnancy centers. And then we also have some kind of non-traditional providers that are realizing they are also a very important part of the pro-life safety net. So we are really, really happy when we can get all of the categories to join us, whether it's a life coach, a birth doula, Catholic charities, mom mentorship groups. I see housing, which is really important, foster care, adoption. This is really good to just have all the diversity that makes up her plan, but still focused around the needs of pregnant and parenting women and families. So we'll just give it one more minute. Please come right in and introduce yourself in the chat. And throughout this presentation, you can use either the chat or the Q&A box to ask any questions. I'll be checking both. So just note that at any time you can put in your question and then I'll ask Stacey at the end. right, let's get started, everybody. As you keep coming in, do keep introducing yourself, and we will get going with a little overview of her plan. So, reminder to everybody, her plan stands for Her Pregnancy and Life Assistance Network, and we are all about connecting and growing the pro-life safety net for the post-Dobbs world. And so I'm going to share my screen and just remind you what our directory looks like. It's so important that we all remember to check if you are listed on the Her Plan directory. So please go to directory.herplan.org and look for yourself, because you see on this big map here, we have this lovely map that can be filtered, and it may be that you have registered for the directory but are caught up in our details and compliance process, and we might need one or two more information or forms to actually be able to list your service on the map, because we do vet everyone before listing. So if you think that you've registered but don't see yourself on the map, please reach out to me. You can email info@herplan.org. That comes directly to me. And we would absolutely love to just make sure every T is crossed, every I is dotted, to make sure you can get on this map. So just a reminder of how it can work. You can search by location or state. So if I were to select Alabama here, it can narrow me to all the resources in Alabama. And one really unique thing about Her Plan is we list virtual and home visit resources as well as office locations. And then you can see a total as well, which is really wonderful. We also have this load more button. You can see here right now we're showing 100 of 155 results. So loading more is going to bring up more of those 155. As you can see here now, we're showing everything for Alabama. And you can just browse the map by zooming in on some of these clusters, or you might want to add more filters of care. So we are always organized by our 7 categories of care and 25 subcategories. So these are all the category filters. And if you ever just don't know how to navigate the map or would like some training videos, let me know. I can send you some videos or arrange a training. And also, it's really great to note that we do have map tips here to walk you through some of the ways to filter. And we also have the Her Plan quiz. So if you hit take the quiz, that can walk you through all kinds of custom questions that are going to recommend different searches for the client or the patient that you are serving. And it's really an amazing tool to help you know what to search for a certain need. So I just wanted to point that out. And then lastly, many of you may not realize we also have a church outreach program to engage churches and also just individuals and communities and providers such as yourself in expanding services or finding new models of ministry. So you can go right here to herplan.org and hit the Church Pathways Guide. And that is how you can download your very own Pathways to Life guide. It's completely a free download, and you'll see we list over 100 models of different ways to help pregnant and parenting women and families, so that you might have ideas to implement more care for the safety net in your community. So I just wanted to point that out because we just came out with a new edition of our Church Pathways Guide that adds a lot more denominations to our denominational guide that goes over which denominations are pro-life or pro-choice or neutral. So you may want to check that out in the back of the book. Well, now it is my absolute joy and honor to welcome Stacey from ARMS, Abuse Recovery Ministry Services. Guys, this is really important for the pro-life movement to know how to deal with circumstances of abuse and just difficulties. Any difficulty that a mom is facing, we want to have a compassionate and pro-woman approach that's going to always help them both, as we say, helping the mom and the baby together. And their fates are intertwined, and we're going to learn more about helping pregnant and parenting women facing abuse. So Stacey, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited. I even saw a couple names I recognized on there. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get started here. Okay. So a lot of information when I do these trainings is if you've watched, bright courses are on there as well. Some of this might be duplicate for you, but it's just so important. There's just no way around when I do these trainings without sharing some of this information. So first off, just a little bit about myself. I'm the founder and executive director of Abuse Recovery Ministry and Services, or ARMS for short. We are a national and international organization. I'm a pastor's kid and married young, have 6 children of my own and 12 grandchildren. In the midst of homeschooling my kids back in the day when no one even knew what homeschooling was, God began to call me into this field. I'm not a survivor of domestic abuse myself. So let me see if I can get this to move. Okay, why is it not moving to the next screen? It's the next. Okay, there we are. Okay, so like I mentioned, we're 26 years old, so we specialize in the domestic violence community as experts, especially from a faith perspective. I've served on multiple councils, secular counselors on domestic violence, fatality review committees, things like that. We're a nonprofit as well, and our largest program is called Her Journey, which is the one I'm going to be talking mostly about, the types of things that we would talk about in there. This program is 15 weeks long. It is free for any victim or survivors of domestic abuse. We have virtual options if we don't have something in a specific area. So I just want you to know that if that's something that your gals need, we're available to them. And we are, like I mentioned, not only national, but Kenya has their own nonprofit status. So ARMS Kenya is what it's called. Nigeria, Uganda, Ghana, Canada, Mexico. We right now are training some people in Austria. So God has just grown this ministry portion of the ministry, and we've served over 37,000 women. So it's been just an amazing journey to watch that happen. Here in our own local area, I'm from Oregon, and in our own local area, we meet the state standards for intervention. So batterers intervention, or domestic violence intervention. So we do men's groups for men who use abusive behaviors, and women's groups called Virtue for women who've been both victims of abuse, who also use abusive behaviors. Are very similar in how they're ran. And then we do a lot of community awareness, a lot of trainings to pastors and staff, as well as pregnancy centers, Union Gospel Rescue Missions, recovery homes, things like that. So that's just a brief interview for us. So why this important? This is important information, and I apologize. I'm going to talk fast because I have so much to say in a short period of time that I have. So 1 in 3 women have experienced domestic violence, rape, or stalking by an intimate partner. That's a lot. 1 in 3. 90% of women who are seeking seeking help during a crisis during their pregnancy have been affected by abuse. So I mean, that's pretty incredible. So 90%. 76% of domestic violence victims, domestic violence was committed against females. There's a lot of statistics around that, but I think that's a pretty accurate one. Over 124,000 pregnant women are victims of domestic violence in the U.S. It's 25% of women experience their first physical act of violence against them during a pregnancy internationally. Unintended pregnancies are 2 to 3 more times more likely to be associated with abuse than intended pregnancies. We can go into a lot more of that. It shows the need for this issue. Studies have found a correlation between domestic violence and increased use of abortion. So again, why this is important, and it's generational, something that goes from one generation to the next. So this kind of shows this. So 75 to 87% of children who've observed, not even been the victims of, but just observed domestic violence at least once, even when their partners believe otherwise. So it's a huge number. Children are 6 times more likely to commit suicide, 50 times more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, 3 times more likely to repeat the cycle in adulthood, and 74 times more likely to commit violent crimes against others. these are children who've been exposed to abuse. So it's a huge issue. I believe a lot of our social issues are born out of domestic violence in the home. It's one of our fastest growing homeless populations, women and children fleeing abuse. So when we talk about domestic abuse, one of the things that has to be understood is that domestic abuse is about power and control, and it's based on a belief system that someone holds. And often we picked up these belief systems as children, and then they're reinforced as we grow up. So beliefs are, every behavior we use is born out of a belief system that we hold. So most of abuse is within this category of what we call controlling behaviors, which become abusive controlling behaviors. They're the ones that people don't really recognize. The tip of the house, or the tip of the iceberg, is the forms of abuse that people do understand and know as abusive, and it also would cover those legal definitions. So most of the time, the women coming into your centers aren't even going to understand that what they're going through is abusive, because they have such a limited definition of what abuse is. And that affects their choices they make around the decisions that they make. So legal terms include harm or the threat of harm. So it's a pretty narrow definition of what abuse would be. So we've had a woman say, well, my abuser, I didn't think it was abuse because my abuser told me that if he didn't break my bone, or if I didn't go to the hospital, then it really wasn't abuse. So that narrowed her ability to realize that what she was really experiencing was abuse. So domestic abuse is a pattern of behaviors used to gain and maintain power and control in an intimate relationship. So it's not that one time. Well, it is. Even if that one time, we've all used abuse from time to time. We said something we shouldn't have said. We did something we shouldn't have done. But someone who's truly abusive is using a pattern of behaviors to gain and maintain power and control in their intimate relationship. So there's a lot of different forms of abuse, and we talk about 8 different forms that are listed here. I'm going to go through them one at a time so that you have a fuller understanding of what abuse is, because this is really important to identifying whether or not someone that you're working with is actually experiencing abuse. If you don't have an understanding of this, and it's going to be harder for you to identify, it's already hard enough for them to identify. So physical abuse is a form of abuse that people do recognize, right? It's the one that people get: the hitting, the pushing, the pinching, the grabbing, the slapping, the strangling. And strangulation is a very serious crime. We used to use the word choking because women weren't comfortable with the word strangulation, but choking is what you do when you choke on food, right? You get food caught in your throat. But strangulation is when someone has their hands or arm around your throat or sitting on you. It's where they're keeping the blood or airflow from going in or out of your brain. And it's dangerous because a woman's at risk of even dying or having a serious strokes months after being strangled. Once somebody has crossed that line where they have strangled someone, they're likely to do it again. And it is so close to committing homicide. And it is, in fact, such a serious thing that 75% of those in prison for committing murder have strangled somebody in the past, whether it was during that event or before. But every category has ones that aren't as obvious. And in this category, it would be posturing, where they're not actually touching the person. They might just stand up, take a step towards that person, get right in their space without touching them, raise a fist or a hand without throwing it, block the door. So they're using their bodies to intimidate. And since men tend to be bigger and stronger than women, this works better for them. So this is a form of physical abuse. So verbal abuse is a highly used form of abuse. Like I said, we've probably all done verbal abuse at least once in our lives. But the ones, again, that are obvious are the yelling, the shouting, the name calling, the swearing, the put downs, the sarcasm, which the word sarcasm actually means a tearing of flesh. It's not always abusive, but it usually is, because there's a little bit of truth to it, and it's at someone's expense. And so it's made into a joke oftentimes, but it is really a negative thing. So, but we got things like blaming and accusing and countering and discounting. I mean, this is a huge category. Abusive jokes, and even the silent treatment, which isn't as obvious, but it's a way to control the conversation. So we include this in here as well. And then we have physical or psychological abuse, or often called emotional abuse. And psychological abuse is the #1 form of abuse used. And of all the women that we serve, they always say this is the worst form of abuse. So physical abuse is scary, it's dangerous, it's illegal. But those wounds usually heal, and pretty quickly. But psychological abuse brings death to a person's soul. And it is something that is very hard to explain to a counselor, to a pastor, and people don't get it. They don't get this form of abuse, but it's the type that it is the most damaging to someone's soul, their mind, their will, their emotions. So I kind of break these into 3 categories. So the first and #1 category is mind games, mental coercion, crazy making, gaslighting, whatever you want to call it, telling her she's crazy. This is where he might say things, and I'm using male as the abuser, but it can be female, that he didn't say or do something that he did say or do, or he tells her she did or said something that she didn't say or do. We had one woman who shared that her husband put the cooking pot in the linen closet to make her think she was going crazy, or moving the keys to make her think she can't remember where she put things. Or I had one woman share that she kept a pen right next to the table where she would do her Bible study each morning, and she was vacuuming and her husband was sitting in her chair, or the chair that she usually sits in, and she stopped. She goes, where's my pen? And he goes, what pen? And she goes, no, I always keep my pen here. And he goes, there's no pen here. So she's thinking, gosh, where did I put that? And she finishes vacuuming and she comes back, and then her pen is sitting right on the table right there by him. And she goes, well, there's my pen. And he goes, what was there all the time? So it's just like keeping her off balance. It could be agreeing about how to discipline the children, and at the last moment backing out of it so she looks like the bad one. And I don't know if you've ever been to the ocean, but at the ocean's edge, at least here on the West Coast, when you're at the water laps over your feet, and it actually pulls the sand out from underneath your feet. So you become unsteady. So you have to move over or you'll fall. And then it does it again, and then you move again, and it does it again. And that's what psychological abuse is like. On an emotional level, it's keeping her off balance, and over and over and over again. So before long, she loses her sense of confidence, her sense of self. She begins to wonder if she is the crazy one, or maybe she is the abusive one, is what she's thinking in her head. This is one of the most insidious forms of abuse out there. And again, someone doesn't have to be yelling or name calling or doing any of the overt forms of abuse for this to be abusive. And again, so hard to explain to people. Another big category is stalking behaviors. And stalking behaviors are everything from the things you would obviously think about, like following her or showing up uninvited, not leaving when asked, pumping people for information, or even the children for information. It could be used as spyware, which is very common and very inexpensive. GPSing them, the use of GPS devices, those little air tags that people use for their luggage that get dropped into their things without them even knowing about it. You really don't want to know how dangerous it is becoming with our with all of our technology. It's pretty scary. I had one training that I had with a detective who said that when he sits down with a victim of abuse, he takes his phone out and he goes, I'm going to put my phone into airplane mode because it's the only way we can be sure that nobody's listening in. Would you be comfortable doing that as well? So we tell women, if you're going to flee a situation, you want to leave your phone behind, because whether she knows it or not, he may be tracking her and also checking everything she's looking on online. It's just, she wants to leave that technology home. And car dealerships are actually the best at looking for GPS devices on cars, because they use them so that people can go test drive cars. So they're really good at finding where those are as well. So the most common form of technology stalking would be multiple calling and multiple texting. So the younger the women, you're going to see this a lot. So he's going to expect her to answer immediately. So she might be with you, and she says, sorry, I have to take this call, or I have to text back, because he's constantly checking on her that way. So another category, and by the way, stalkers are more likely to commit homicide, so it makes them more dangerous. And I forgot to mention that strangulation is a felony in many states. Here in Oregon, it is as well. And with stalking behaviors, if someone's a serious stalker, she can, in some states, get a stalking protection order, which has higher legal consequences. So here in Oregon, if he breaks a stalking order twice, it's a felony. So you can go to jail, be arrested for that. So it's a big deal. And then we have another category, which would be isolation, keeping her from friends and family. He could outright telling her not to spend time with certain people, or he doesn't tell her she can't, but she pays for it later. So he gives her the silent treatment, or he tears apart the house, or whatever forms of abuse he uses. So it just becomes easier not to go out, or it becomes to the point where no one wants to come over because he's so difficult to be around. It could be moving her from place to place or church to church, so that she does not create a support system where she could get out of the situation. So it's a pretty big deal. Looks and stares, here's some oddball ones. Looks and stares to generate fear, using the children either to encourage them to join in the abuse or to spy on her. And then public humiliation is another one that we talk about in here, where he does something to humiliate her. This might be done through sarcasm, where everybody laughs, but it really is cutting to her. Sometimes we call that the knife of ice, because it melts away and he goes, what? I was just joking. So psychological abuse is a huge, and all forms of abuse are psychological, because 100% of abuse has an emotional impact on the person. So psychological abuse is the largest form of abuse used. So then we have financial abuse. This is a form of abuse that happens even after a woman leaves a situation. So controlling the finances, hiding accounts or assets so that she doesn't know that he has these things, or keeping her partially informed about finances. A lot of times these abusers will make her sign the tax forms without allowing her to see them. Restricting her employment, so either making her work or keeping her from working, making her give her money, denying basic needs, making her give an account for every penny. So I had one woman say she needed formula for the baby, and she kept telling him this. Took her 3 days to convince him. He finally goes fine and made her write a list, and he went through the list, crossed off anything he didn't think was necessary, and then he, after she got home, went through every bag to make sure she didn't buy anything off the list. So this happens even after she leaves, where he's not willing to pay child support or spousal support, even though the court is requiring that of him. We tell the women, don't count on it. It's do what you need to do legally. A lot of times it will take 6-7 months before they can catch up to him to start garnishing his wages. But a lot of times the men quit their job and move to another job. It takes another 7 months. He'll quit his job again, and that happens over and over again. So we just really encourage them to try to be self-sufficient without him. And then it could also be making her handle all the finances while he misuses the money. And now it's her fault that they've overdrawn in their bank account. So this is not about arguing about money as much as it is about using money to gain power and control in a certain way. And a lot of times our younger generation now they're not even combining their resources, but even at that, they agree on he's going to pay for this, she's going to pay for that, but then he doesn't. So she ends up having to pay for more because he's not willing to pay for that car insurance that they have or whatever. So again, it's just financial control. And then we have sexual abuse, which again is one that people get, the rape, the unwanted touch, the sexual put downs, sexual name calling, pornography, affairs, keeping her pregnant. I had one woman who told me that she had 7 kids and he got her pregnant again. This is a way to control her so that she couldn't leave. And she told me that she went and got an abortion because she just couldn't do it again. She couldn't handle another child. And this was her thinking on this. Or it could be, you know, keeping her from getting pregnant when she wants to, or it could be just all kinds of things. So extreme jealousy fits in here. And this also lends to all the stalking behaviors that we talked about before. So again, this is a big category with our men. We take a couple weeks to go through this. But we see this with both our male and female perpetrators, that the jealousy issue is a part of that. Okay, so we have property abuse. We don't always think about, well, I never thought of this before. Property abuse is one where you're using property to gain power by being intimidating. So if he can convince her he's dangerous, he doesn't ever have to be physically abusive with her. And it's not illegal for him to punch a hole in his own wall. So this is everything from doing what I just said to slamming the door, sabotaging the car, driving erratically to scare her, throwing things, breaking things, hiding things, you know, even using the phone, hanging up in the middle of a conversation so that he gets the last word in, so she feels disregarded and powerless. And the use of weapons. And for many of our guys who have used weapons, it's not so much about using the weapon as it has been about the threat of the use of the weapon. So he threatens to use the weapon by tapping knives while he's arguing with her. And we've had guys in our program who've been court mandated to come because of that type of behavior. Or we had one woman share that she went over to her boyfriend's apartment and he came out of his bedroom with a sawed-off shotgun and laid it on the table and said, "I just don't know what I'd do if you left me." And she was able to get a restraining order or protection order, depending on what state you're in, because of that. And when she went to court, because he contested it, which they can do, they asked her, well, why, you know, why did you do this? I've had other women who've been abused for many years, and they're going, well, why, after all these years, are you now finally coming forward to get this restraining order? If you say this has been going on, why didn't you do it earlier? And the women are able to say, well, because I've been attending this class where I've learned about what abuse is, and this is abusive behavior, and that's helped them in court to be able to win those cases and have those restraining orders, those protection orders stand and stay in place. So spiritual abuse, because we're a faith-based organization, we include this, the misuse of scripture, discouraging her from going to church or keeping her from going to church, making her go to church, questioning her theology, her salvation. For our regular church attending men, the most common thing is he goes to the leadership, the pastors in the church, to discredit her. And he does it very calmly and very believably, where he says, you know, I'm not really being abusive. She was abused before, so she's just viewing what I'm doing as abuse because of her past. Or he tells the pastor that she has mental health issues, and usually it's bipolar. I don't know how all us women became bipolar, but that's a new thing that the guys are sharing. And I do intakes with these guys, so I hear these things over and over, and every once in a while I'll have a guy stop and look at me and he'll go, "You've heard this before." And I'm like, "Yeah, a few times." He'll also say that she's cheating on him. That's a very common thing. So when she does come to the church leadership, she's in a state of trauma. So she's blinking a lot. She can't put her sentences together. And the pastor wonders, maybe he is right. Maybe she does have mental health issues, when really she's just in trauma. So she's often not believed or thought to be crazy. So either lying or crazy. And then we include in here, which isn't on this screen, but we include any abuse in front of a child or to a child, because the most common analogy used for God is father. There's feminine analogies as well in the Bible, but the most common is father. And so if your earthly father is harsh, meaning cruel, it affects a child's ability to relate to God. So I had a young man come into our men's program who was a pastor's son, and his father had taken him and his brother out into the woods one night with a rifle and shovels and had them dig their own graves. And while he didn't shoot them, you can imagine that the mental, how that mentally affected them, and has for the rest of their lives. And yet he was still helping his father in his church, even though he was extremely angry at God. And so, you know, it just does, there's nothing worse than mixing faith with abuse. And for our women who are women of faith, it puts an extra layer of barriers for them to seek help for so many reasons. And we, in our programs, help them to overcome some of those things that have been a struggle for them, and how faith has been misused to coerce them into staying into unhealthy relationships, which is not God's plan. I believe I believe that God sees abuse as a child abuse issue, not an adult issue, because we are God's children. So just as if you have children and you sent them to school and they were beaten, harassed, and abused, and they came home crying, you wouldn't sit in your chair and say, you know, pray harder, my child, and win them over by your quiet and gentle spirit. You would go down to that school and you'd find out who's doing this to your child and what are you going to do to make it stop. And if it didn't stop, you wouldn't think twice to remove your child from that abusive situation. So why would we think a God who loves us more than we love our own children not want to do the same for us? And I think that we really need to understand that yes, God hates divorce, and we talk about this in our program, but he doesn't hate people who divorce. He understands it's going to happen because of the hardness of men's hearts and because of just the problems and the struggles in our world these days. It's so difficult. In fact, a lot of our clients coming into our intervention programs aren't even married anymore because of just so much lack of trust now and lack of commitment and the understanding of what that means. It's very difficult. Okay, I'll get off that little podium I had there for a moment. Then let's go on to animal abuse, our last one. So again, this isn't, obviously, if you kick a dog, it's abusive. It's the animal abuse, absolutely. But in terms of our programs, it's about, again, controlling a person. So it has to involve another person. So I do these in categories as well. So there's a threat of getting rid of or getting rid of. There's a threat of harm or harming. There's a threat of killing or killing. There's the not feeding or watering the animal. There's also getting a pet the other person's allergic to or afraid of, or also getting being overly affectionate to the pet while you're withholding affection from the other person, from their partner. And those are all things to control or punish the other person in some way. So for our women's program, we had a woman who took a pillow and rubbed it all over the cat because her husband was allergic to cats. They had a fight early in the day. And so she rubbed it all over the cat, put it back on the pillow so that he'd wake up with puffy eyes. And so a secondary aggression form of abuse. And I don't have time to go into that, but there's primary and secondary aggression, doesn't make it okay. But it's that would be animal, it would be property, it'd be psychological, it'd be all three forms of abuse in one incident, which is how we have our clients explain who use abuse, how they explain the different ways they've been abusive in the past. Okay, so the cycle of abuse is really important to understand. The old cycle was just kind of a three-pronged cycle, but the way this works, and I'm just going to really briefly go through this. I'm going to check my time. I'm going to briefly go through this so that we can give you time to ask questions. So I'm going to start in the top portion, and this is where whatever forms of abuse happen, so whatever they use, and then the abuser goes into what we call the guilt part of the cycle. By the way, the abuse part of the cycle is when that's happened, that's when a woman is most willing to get help. If you don't get her during that time, you're likely not to get her, because the abuser very quickly moves into the guilt part of the cycle where they apologize, they give, they promise to never do it again. They might cry, they might go to counseling, all the things that she's been wanting to hear. So he just shifted his harsh, mean, cruel behaviors to being kind and sweet and loving. At this point, if you talk to her, she's like, well, he said he was sorry. He said he'd get help. And who doesn't get into a relationship to see it work? So of course she's going to want to believe him. So then he very quickly moves into rationalizing stage. I'll get the word out, where he justifies his abuse. So this is where he tells himself and her, well, I wouldn't have done it if you wouldn't have done this. Or I just had a really bad day at work. or it was the way I was raised, or it was the alcohol, or whatever, hundreds of thousands of excuses that are out there. So when he does this, he has no reason to change where he promised before in the guilt part of the cycle, no motivation to change whatsoever because it wasn't his fault. Now, if you talk to her gently and rationalize when during this form of the phase of the cycle of abuse, she's going to be saying things like, well, you know, I was abusive too. I yelled at him. I called him a name. I even threw something at him. So she's going to be taking responsibility for his abusive behavior. But no matter what she does, her abuse or whatever behavior, we're not excusing her abuse, but it doesn't excuse his abuse either. So no matter what rationalization he's using, it is not okay. So now they move into the normal part of the cycle, which is really a false normal. A false normal because they go to bed, they wake up the next day, he pretends like it never happened. And in order for her to keep the peace, she has to play into this part of the cycle and pretend like everything's okay. Otherwise, things get bad for her. And for our women who see themselves as fighter, they will bring it up because nothing was resolved. And so the women do sometimes try to bring it up, but he's going to shut her down. Hey, that was yesterday. I said I was sorry. You know, stop bringing up the past. So he's going to do things to shut her down. And they look like the most normal, functional couples. They're in our churches and they're involved in ministries and they look like the perfect family. But there's all this chaos going on in the home. During the case building, she starts feeling more tension. He's not being as nice because what he's doing during this part of the cycle is he's thinking about all the things that bug him about her. So he's building a case against her and she can feel the tension rising. And then we get to planning and setup. And planning and setup, the guys are always going, Stacey, I don't think I do this. This sounds so premeditated. For most of our guys, it's not premeditated. You know, a sociopath will be premeditated, but that's a very, very, very small percent of the men that we ever see. We hardly ever see these guys in group, and they shouldn't be in group, honestly. But in planning, it's just a continuation of their self-talk. So they bring it to a conclusion, like, let's say he's jealous. So he tells himself, he's been telling himself all week long, she's cheating on me. You know, when I get home, I'm going to check her phone. I'm going to check her social media. I'm going to question her. So that's a plan. For the guys who maybe he works and she stays home, he's telling her how lazy. He's telling himself that she's so lazy. House is always messed. Dinner's never made. Gosh, if I get home and the house is messed and dinner's not made, I'm just going to lose it. That's a plan. Subconsciously most of the time. So for most of our men, they just plan an argument. That's what they say. They just plan to argue. They're not happy people. They're unhappy with themselves. So it makes them feel better to put it on someone else. So the setup is creating the circumstances where she can't win no matter what she does. So in the first situation I mentioned, he comes home, he grabs the phone out of her hand and he's going, he's looking through her phone and she's going, what are you doing? Who's this Jack? And she goes, that's my cousin. Yeah, right. I bet you're sleeping with him is his response. It's crazy. All the things that the guys just assume, they make up in their head. Obviously it's the other way around, but most of the time it is. Occasionally it can be true, but it's usually not. So he's just questioning her about this. For the guy who thinks that she's lazy, he walks in the door and the house is clean and dinner's on the table, but he's already emotionally elevated. And the guys have told us they walk in the door already emotionally elevated because they've been doing all this negative self-talk. And the house is clean, but he focuses on that one toy that was left out, or how she never makes the kind of food that he likes, and he throws it in the sink and the fight's on. Or for the guys who create the argument, they just start picking at the things that they know are going to get her riled up, basically, until she raises her voice. And so now she's the abusive one because she raised her voice first. So a lot of times, and then the fight is on, basically, and that way he can abuse her and he can walk out of the house, whatever, go have drinks with his buddies. If he has addiction issues, that's a way to get out of the house as well. And, you know, this just plays out over and over again. It's a no-win situation for her, no matter what she does. And so there's a lot of really less overt cycles that are going on. And then once in a while, there'd be a more overt cycle where there's actual physical violence or things that would meet that legal limit. Some of our women do experience physical abuse all the time, as we define it. Other women, never. And then a vast majority on different levels experience it in different ways. The posturing thing is a very common thing to see. So again, men may not be hitting her, but using those forms of abuse. It's a big issue. You can see it. So I can give you more information about this, but again, I'm kind of rushing through because I have so much information I want to give you that will be helpful to you, because you're going to see kind of where she is in walking in to your centers or wherever you're calling from, to be able to recognize the cycles playing out over and over again. And her being able to recognize this is helpful. We have on our website a place for her to go and actually see how healthy her relationship is. And sometimes that can help her to realize that she really is in an abusive relationship. So the good thing is that we can work together in this, and there's some do's and don'ts of working with those that you're serving. Okay, the victims as they're walking in, if 90% of them have experienced or are experiencing abuse, you can guarantee that you're dealing with this. So first off, we're just going to listen carefully. We're not going to ignore the signs, even if she can't see them, because a lot of times, again, because of how she defines abuse, she is not going to recognize what's going on. We want to believe her. We're not there to be her judge, so we're not going to discount her feelings. If she tells you something has happened, then you believe her, and then you get her to the services that she needs. And I've had pastors, because I do a lot of pastor trainings, who, have struggled with this. It's like, well, she wants me to go talk to her husband. And I say, you need to tell her that would not be safe. And instead that you're going to get her some help first, and then that you'll get to the point of being able to help her or actually talk to her husband. But right now is the time to get her the help that she needs. So do share the types of abuse with her. Don't act like because it's not a physical form of abuse that it's not a big deal. Do reinforce that she's never to blame for someone's choice to abuse. She does not move the muscles in somebody else's body, making him act a certain way. So I tell the guys, when they say, well, she made me or she pushed my buttons, I'll say, well, what buttons are those? I'd really like to see them, because I only have a belly button. You don't have buttons to push. She didn't make him behave the way that he behaved. And so when the guys are saying, well, she made me, I'm like, that's terrifying. If I knew someone could move the muscles in my mouth, the muscles in my arms, I wouldn't go outside my door. And then they go, okay, I chose, which is what we encourage them to use, those types of words. I chose to be abusive. I chose to yell. I chose to call her name. I chose to push her. So she didn't make him. So we do want to help her to see that she has value, and she and deserves to be treated, doesn't deserve to be treated that way. I'm sorry, that's probably an error in mine. Doesn't deserve to be treated abusively is really what I'm trying to say here. So we don't want to tell her what to do, because the last thing she needs is another controlling person in her life. She really needs to know that she's valuable and doesn't deserve this. We want to just to support her decisions. We don't want to be judgmental. There's going to be times that she stays when we think she should leave. Times that she leaves, you might think she should stay. It's not our place. We're not living in that situation. We're not going to stand before God for her. So do give her time to process the information. She's not going to be able to just move right away. Don't tell her that she's being codependent or enabling. It's not something that we say in the faith community, or not the faith community, but in the domestic violence community. There's earmarks of codependency, but she's not enabling him to be abusive. If he was not with her, he would be doing the same behaviors with someone else. So she is not enabling him to be abusive. We don't want to make it her fault that she is being abused by him. We want to help her to process. We do want to help her, encourage her to seek help, and but we don't want to encourage her the couples counseling. Now, of all the women, I don't think I've ever had a woman not try couples counseling. And why not? We want to save our relationships. It's, again, no one gets into a relationship to see it in. So we will try everything. But one of the handouts that I forwarded to Cheney is the 12 reasons why couples counseling isn't appropriate. normal relationship conflict and domestic violence are two different things. They look similar, like kind of like oil and water. If you put them in a bottle together, you can shake them all you want, but they're going to separate because they're not the same. So they can't be dealt with the same. And in fact, couples counseling makes it more dangerous for a victim of abuse, because now she's sharing the secrets that have been going on behind closed doors. Now she has to go home with them. So you can imagine, I have a lot of horror stories around couples counseling. We have a few counselors that we have on our website. Once we train counselors, we'll refer people to them. But we want to know they've gotten the training, because we believe that all counselors, social workers, and pastors should have 40 hours of victim advocacy training, because it's not really being taught in college. You might get a couple hours. There isn't a course for this in most colleges. There's some beginning to hear some rumors of it coming out, which I think will be really great. But we do offer that too. So do help her to safety plan. And that's something that we teach, or you can send her to us or to the victim advocates in your community. There's usually a mothership of domestic violence in your community where you can send them, where you can help them to understand how to safety plan. But gosh, while you have them right there, what a great thing to be able to teach them. We have our safety plan you can download for free off of our website. Helps her just to know how she can plan, so she doesn't have to be homeless. We can help her start helping her before that happens, before she actually leaves. We want to be able to do that. We don't want to act like it's not a big deal, because when a woman leaves, she's at the greatest risk of fatal injury, because 75% of domestic violence homicides happen after a woman leaves. He's just lost control. Death is the ultimate form of control. And so she needs the safety plan to be safe. So do give her resources. Don't disregard her level of readiness. And this is something that we need to understand. It's like not every woman, when we talk to her about this, is ready to actually make a change. You might even help her move, but she's going to go right back because she wasn't ready. And so that education piece she'll keep it going in her mind. And we have these tear-off tabs that we put in the women bathroom stalls that we can give you. And we know, and in churches, they're always like, all the tabs are gone, and they're shocked because they think that there's nobody in their church who's going through this. But again, 1 in 3. So it takes women usually 6 months to a year to get up to the courage to actually call us. And it's usually right after an incident. And if we can get her in group immediately, and our groups are open so they can just join immediately, even though there's 15 lessons that we rotate through, we just have them open so they can join right when they need it. Otherwise, we know we will lose them, and they'll go back to the abuser, because he's going to very quickly go back into that guilt part of that cycle that we talked about. So we do let her know that you're there for her, and don't do all the work for her. Sit beside her while she's making those phone calls. Go with her to court if you want, but believe me, every time she makes that phone call or does that next step to move forward, it gives her confidence for the following steps that she's going to take. Getting out of an abusive situation is not easy. It's very complicated. It's very hard. There's more reasons to stay than I have time to go over with. It's not easy to understand. So she's got to be ready to do this, even though you can see it all and you can think, oh my gosh, this is super dangerous. We do, as advocates, say we're concerned about your safety from what you're sharing with us. We think that you're in danger, but it would be better to help her to come to that conclusion herself. And there's ways that we can teach you to do that. So don't give up on her. And the good thing is we can work together, which is great news. We're partnering with a lot of pregnancy centers. We're partnering with a lot of Union Gospel Rescue missions, and a lot of different churches and community members and all of this. So as we work together, it takes all of us to do this, right? We all have our piece to do. And it really does take that coordinated community response that was kind of the key words when I first started 26 years ago. And yet we're still working on it. We're still working to work together. So how can we help as an organization? Well, we're here. You can call us if you have a situation you don't know what to do with. So we'll answer those phone calls. We do a lot of support. We have that free Her Journey 15-week program that's led you around, so they can simply call, super trauma informed. It's not a process group. They don't have to give us their real name. They don't even have to talk in group. That's why some of the counselors love sending people to us, because they don't have to talk at all. And these counselors see these women change once they're in this group environment. There's opportunity for them to ask questions, and at the end to share a little bit, but it's always for a positive reason, because we always pray for them, whether they're believers or not. And we serve in prisons, we serve all over the place, and have the same response. The women just find it safe and love it and go through it usually multiple times. So, or we can train you to be a Her Journey leader so that you can do this right in your own community, your own centers. We often encourage people who are doing in a center and area to also do it for the general population, because we get calls from all over and we need more in-person groups. So it's 13 weeks of training. You receive ongoing consultation and year-round support. We have you do a 1-week online training to recertify each year for ongoing support, and then we'll put on our website the general location, like the county and the state that we have a group in, so that women going online can find and see that we have something there. Otherwise, they can join our Zoom group, which we have every single day of the week covered. So in multiple Zoom groups each day. So ARMS also offers Bright Course training. So if you're on Bright Course, we're on there. They told us recently that we're the second most watched course they have, which shows what a huge issue this is. We also have those on our website for a really nominal fee that you can watch have for a couple months and watch, which would take you through a lot more information. Not the same as our Her Journey training, by the way, but it has some of the same things, like the types of abuse and cycle of abuse will be gone over, because we can't train without that, basically. So here's my contact information and our website and all the different ways that you can connect with us. And I just want you to know that, again, we are here for you. And if I'm going to answer questions for you right now. I'm going to stop sharing, and you can get that information on that PowerPoint too. But I know Cheney's probably got some questions for me. So, I know we have like an hour, right? So I'm trying to respect
So we have
that.
about 6 minutes for questions, which is amazing. And don't worry, everybody, I'm going to email this out to everyone that attended or registered for the webinar. So you will be getting this PowerPoint and recording. So I just wanted to say that, and then we'll go right into questions. So a law enforcement statistic from a few years back stated that homicide was the #1 case of death for pregnant women. Has that changed? Do you know anything about this?
I don't know if it's the #1 cause of injury for death for pregnant women. I know that it is the #1 cause of injury for women in the entire world. So statistically, and stats take a while to get out, right? They do the research. It takes a few years before it comes out. The stat that we've been using is that 3 women a day are murdered by an intimate partner or former intimate partner. And I think that's low, because COVID creates increased stress, and increased stress creates increased frequency and severity of abuse. So I believe that's low. Like Seattle, Washington during COVID had a 70% increase in domestic violence homicides. But again, with pregnant women, the most common thing for them is that's when they experience physical violence for the first time. So you could see the correlation.
Wow. How many locations do you have, and what is your dream for expansion for being nationwide? I know you mentioned the virtual Zooms every day of the week, so you've got that going on, but in terms of local expansion.
I would love to see us in every state and every county. We know even the rural areas, oh my gosh, there's so few resources for them too. And we right now have, I think, 65 in-person locations. I think, well, maybe not quite 65. We've had to build back up after COVID. We had a lot of leaders that had led first for 20 years, which is unheard of in the domestic violence field, because it's such a hard topic. But because there's so much hope in the work we do, a lot of the women lead for years and years, because we get to see these women change right before our very eyes, which is pretty awesome.
Wow. Okay, great question here about the relationship between domestic abuse and abortion. So, do you have any process of gathering relationship or family of origin history related to abortion or other forms of pregnancy loss? For example, men coercing an abortion, men using chemical abortion pills to induce an abortion of a wanted pregnancy, or women using the threat of abortion as a relationship control? And do you refer for abortion healing?
We do refer to for abortion healing, and for if the partner is have pornography addiction, any kind of addiction, we'll refer out to other agencies as well. Because we're trauma informed, there is no intake, there is no information gathering. We hear it as they feel safe in the group. They begin to share with us these things, so we hear it, but we don't have. It would take away part of our trauma-informed approach to gather that information. And we just want the women there. We want them to find that healing.
That's so wonderful. Thank you. We're learning so much about so many different pieces. This is a great question. How likely is it for an abuser to change? I know you've worked with abusers too. What's your experience with that?
So the national study states, and this is just one way to measure, because you can't really, there isn't a way to measure like all the emotional forms of abuse, but nationally, for men who are convicted and sent to a program, a batter's intervention program, and completed, the average is at 50% get rearrested, which, I mean, that's still better than nothing, right? I mean, there is some change. It doesn't mean he's changed all his forms of abuse, but he's not doing the illegal forms of abuse.
Mhm.
Our organization, we've been running our numbers every year, and since 2015, we've been running at 5%. So we know that God makes a difference. We also know that really good facilitation makes a difference. And then the third thing would be good materials. So we have those materials as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. How do you overcome combinations of types of abuse? Because combinations are likely common. And if so, which type of abuse do you educate on or address first?
They're all combined. Really, they're all connected. No one's going to go to physical abuse unless the other forms of abuse aren't working. Okay, because people continue to amp up their abuse if one isn't working. So, with the men, we're going to talk about all the psychological forms of abuse, because most of the men will say, well, I never hit her. They're there. He slapped her that one time, he says. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But we're going to talk about that belief system is really what we're going to focus on, because the beliefs support their behaviors. So if we can't change their belief systems, all we're doing is pulling the top off of a weed. We're not getting to the root. It only takes a week for that weed to grow back, right? So it's just a matter of time, and anybody can behave well. So if a woman separates, we tell her plan at least 6 months, because anybody can behave well for a while. And that gives her time to heal, and it gives her a chance to see whether or not he's really serious about getting help. And if he goes to a program, she'll find out whether he's using the program as another controlling behavior, or whether he's really put his heart into this and is doing the work he needs to do. And we have a lot of great stories of men who do the hard work, but the vast majority will make some change, but oftentimes not enough to save the relationship. And then we have the small group of guys who don't make any change at all and don't stay in the program very long.
Just as we're closing up here, I wonder if you would just close with an admonition to the providers that feel like they don't necessarily serve only women, or they don't see only pregnant or parenting women. They might be a little bit non-traditional, not a pregnancy center or a clinic. How does this still intersect with them, and why do they still need to know this information?
I think everybody needs to know this information, because it is an equal opportunity offender. It's not just about pregnancy issues. It's not just, in the faith community or just outside of the faith community. It is not just in any social class. It is it's everywhere. And so the reality is that even if you're just the average person out there, like I was when I first started, knew nothing about abuse when I first started, we all need to know this information because we're running into these people all the time. And once I knew this information, and no matter where I go and people ask you what you do, everybody I talk to, it's like on the plane, I'm like, oh, please don't ask me what I do, because I'm gonna get to sit and listen for 2 hours about their story or their mother's story, their aunt's story, or whoever's story, because it is such a huge issue. I believe it was a pandemic before we had a pandemic. It is a huge issue. And so everybody needs to know and needs to care. And you don't have to know it all. You just need to know what resources are in your community and where you can send them. And that's the good news, is you don't have to be an expert in this.
And that's what her plan is all about. So perfect ending. Thank you, Stacey. We are collaborating together for comprehensive care. Thanks so much for joining us. I will be sending out the recording and hope to see you again next month.
Thank
Blessings.
you. Yes.